Prologue. Oh my God, is that really her? My sister-in-law Margaret's voice was trembling. The same woman who had looked down on me for over 40 years, calling me the orphanage girl, now stood frozen like she'd been struck by lightning. Her younger sister Jennifer couldn't even close her mouth. For decades, she had boasted about being from an elite family, while dismissing me as that woman with no background. Now she just stood there, pale as a ghost. On the stage hung a large banner celebrating 30 years of best-selling author, Wildflower. A special evening with the writer. And the person standing on that stage? It was me, Grace Kim, the same daughter-in-law who had been treated as less than nothing in this family for 43 years. The host raised his microphone.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the author, who has touched millions of hearts while remaining anonymous for 3 decades. With over 6 million copies sold and $47 million donated anonymously to charity, tonight she finally reveals her identity.
Thunderous applause erupted from the audience. I slowly took the microphone. At that moment, my eyes met my sister-in-law's eyes. The same spot where I had stood 43 years ago, when I first married into this family. But this time, everything was different. Let me tell you my story. How an orphan daughter-in-law came to stand on this stage. Chapter 1. The day I became a bride. It was the spring of 1981. I was a 25-year-old waitress, and the man who would become my husband, Daniel, was a 30-year-old medical student. We met at a small restaurant near the university where I worked. Daniel came in every day at lunchtime and ordered the same thing. He always sat by the window, reading. Sometimes medical textbooks, sometimes literature. One day, I accidentally spilled soup on his book. I was so flustered I didn't know what to do. But he just smiled and said it was fine, that he'd read that book 3 times already and practically had it memorized. That was our first real conversation. When Daniel learned I was putting myself through night school, he seemed impressed. Working days and studying nights, he said I was remarkable. I was a sophomore studying literature. I wanted to write. Growing up in an orphanage, books had been my only comfort. We grew close naturally. He asked about my past, and I told him the truth. I never knew my parents' faces. I grew up in an orphanage until I was 18. After that, I survived on my own. He was silent for a long time. Then he quietly proposed. I shook my head. I already knew what kind of family he came from. 3 generations of doctors. His father ran a major hospital. His mother came from old money. An orphan marrying into that family? It was impossible. But Daniel wouldn't give up. He said he got to decide what mattered, and if he loved me, that was enough. So we got married. His parents' opposition was beyond anything I'd imagined. His father called it a disgrace to the family. His mother refused to eat for a month in protest. His sisters cried and said their brother had lost his mind. But Daniel stood firm. He said if he couldn't marry me, he'd never marry anyone. Finally, his family gave in. But there was one condition. My background must never be revealed to anyone outside the family. His mother's exact words still echo in my ears 43 years later. She said she'd die of shame if anyone found out. The wedding was modest. His family said there was no reason to make it extravagant. Most of the guests were from his side. From my side, there was only the nun, who had raised me at the orphanage, and a few friends. At the reception, I overheard his sisters whispering, "Is that all the guests she has? She really has nothing, does she? I heard she's from an orphanage. No parents at all. Why would our brother marry someone like that?" I heard everything. But I had to smile. It was my wedding day. The day that was supposed to be the happiest of my life. That night, in our wedding suite, I cried my heart out. Daniel held me, stroking my back, apologizing, promising to make things better, promising his family would change. I shook my head. I told him I would try harder. I would earn their respect, no matter how long it took. Back then, I truly believed it. If I worked hard enough, if I was devoted enough, someday this family would accept me. But that was the naive thinking of a 25-year-old girl. Chapter 2. The Sorrows of a Daughter-in-Law. Life with my in-laws was worse than I could have imagined. The first holiday was my mother-in-law's birthday. I woke up at 4 in the morning to prepare the food. I used every cooking skill I'd learned at the orphanage to set a beautiful table. My mother-in-law looked at the spread and scoffed. She asked what this was supposed to be, saying the dishes looked pathetic, that this is what happens when someone has no proper upbringing. My sister-in-law Margaret chimed in. She said her mother shouldn't expect much from someone who grew up in an orphanage. Her younger sister Jennifer clicked her tongue and wondered aloud why their brother married someone like me. I couldn't say a word. I just kept my head down. Daniel's face turned red with anger, but I held his hand to stop him. Fighting would only make things harder. From that day on, every visit was the same. No matter what I did, the criticism followed. Because I had no upbringing. Because I had no parents. Because of my background. When I gave birth to our first child, a son, I thought things might improve. My mother-in-law held her grandson and smiled. She said at least it was a boy. That it would have been terrible if it had been a girl. I didn't know whether to feel happy or heartbroken. The fact that my worth went up simply because I'd produced a male heir devastated me. But even that small relief didn't last. When the baby caught a cold, my mother-in-law blamed me. She said the child was weak because the mother was weak, that who knows what I ate growing up in that orphanage. When my son's grades dropped in school, she said the same thing. She said blood doesn't lie, that even though he was her grandson, his mother's blood was the problem. Everything was my fault. When things went well, it was thanks to his family. When things went wrong, it was because of my background. The hardest times were during the holiday gatherings and family events. Every holiday, I woke up before dawn to prepare elaborate feasts. My sisters-in-law never lifted a finger. They sat in the living room watching TV, saying it was the daughter-in-law's job, not theirs. But they always had something to say about the food. This dish is too salty. Don't you care about your husband's health? The vegetables are overcooked. Some people just can't cook no matter what. One Thanksgiving, I woke up at 4 in the morning. Alone, I prepared the turkey, made the side dishes, baked the pies. My sisters-in-law didn't show up until noon. Margaret looked around the kitchen and asked if I still wasn't done, commenting that I was slow as always. I said nothing. As I was carrying the finished dishes to the table, Jennifer passed by and pretended to accidentally bump my arm. The platter of carefully arranged appetizers crashed to the floor. She apologized insincerely and asked why I was standing in the way, telling me to get back to the kitchen where I belonged. I cleaned up the broken platter and scattered food, crying inside. My finger was bleeding, but no one noticed or cared. The only reason I survived was Daniel. On the drive home from every family gathering, he held my hand. He apologized for his weakness, for not being able to protect me. I told him it was okay, that having him on my side was enough. I truly meant it. Just knowing my husband loved me felt like enough. But nothing could stop the tears that soaked my pillow every night. Chapter 3. Taking up the pen. It was 1993. I was 37 years old. That summer, something particularly painful happened. I had spent an entire month preparing for my mother-in-law's 70th birthday celebration. I did everything alone. But at the party, in front of all the guests, my mother-in-law announced that her useless daughter-in-law couldn't do anything right. So her wonderful daughters had to do all the work. She said she was lucky to have such devoted daughters, because if she'd relied on me, the party would have been a disaster. The guests laughed. My sisters-in-law laughed. I was the only one who couldn't laugh. That night, after the children were asleep, I sat alone in the study. I took out an old notebook from my college days. I picked up a pen. And I just wrote, without thinking, just pouring out everything inside me. I am a wildflower. No one planted me, but I bloomed. No one tended to me, but I grew. I've been bent by storms, trampled by feet, sometimes pulled out like a weed. But when the sun rises, I lift my head again. A wildflower has no greenhouse. But a wildflower has the sky. The sky that belongs to no one and everyone. The words flowed effortlessly. Like a dam breaking, everything I'd held inside poured out onto the page. I wrote until dawn, filling 10 pages. When I finished, my heart felt a little lighter. The next day, I sent what I'd written to a women's magazine. Without any real expectations, just hoping someone might read it. Instead of my real name, I used a pen name. Wildflower. A month later, the magazine contacted me. They said my piece had won their writing contest. The response was overwhelming. They asked if I would write for them again. I couldn't believe it. The grief I had poured out had touched other people's hearts. From that day on, I wrote every month. Every night after the children fell asleep, I sat alone in the study with my pen. I wrote my story, my wounds, my hopes. I never told anyone about my pen name. Not even my husband. It was my secret alone. The only space where I existed. Not as the looked down upon daughter-in-law, but as myself. 5 years later, Wildflower's essays had become quite famous. The magazine series ended and my first book was published. It was called Letters from an Orphan Girl. The book became a bestseller. Broadcasting stations requested interviews, but I refused them all. People were curious about who Wildflower really was. Some rumored she was a famous actress. Others speculated she was a wealthy heiress. No one knew. No one knew that Wildflower was an ordinary housewife who washed dishes, did laundry, and endured criticism from her in-laws. The royalties started coming in. Substantial amounts. But I never spent a single penny on myself. The day my first royalty check arrived, I made an anonymous donation to an orphanage. The same orphanage where I'd grown up. Instead of using my pen name, I simply wrote, Anonymous. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in years. Giving back the love I had received warmed my heart. 10 years passed like that. Wildflower had published more than 10 books. Total sales exceeded 2 million copies. Donations exceeded $10 million. But still, no one knew who I really was. One day, my husband discovered my manuscript in the study. I couldn't hide it anymore. I confessed everything. Daniel was speechless for a long time. Then he held me tight. He apologized, saying that because he hadn't protected me, I had to go this far alone. I told him it was okay, that writing had helped me survive, that this was my secret. And I wanted only him to know. My husband promised to keep my secret. And he did. 3 years after mother-in-law's passing. It was autumn of 2024. 3 years had passed since my mother-in-law died. I was 68 now. My husband Daniel was 72, and the hospital he ran had grown to 500 beds. Our son was the head of surgery at the hospital. Our daughter had become a lawyer. We had 2 grandchildren. From the outside, it looked like a happy retirement. But my sisters-in-law hadn't changed at all. For the 3rd anniversary of my mother-in-law's passing, I went to the family home. I woke up at 4 in the morning to prepare the memorial dinner. Just like I had 43 years ago as a new bride. Still doing this at 68, I muttered to myself. But I shook off the thought. It was about respecting my mother-in-law. No matter how she had treated me, honoring the dead was the right thing to do. My sisters-in-law arrived at 9. Margaret was as arrogant as ever. Her husband was the director of a nursing home affiliated with our hospital. He had graduated from a prestigious university and came from a good family. Margaret was always proud of that. Jennifer followed her older sister around as usual. Her husband ran a medical equipment company that had contracts with our hospital. Business was good because of the connection. Margaret walked into the kitchen and looked around. She sighed and asked how, after 43 years, I still couldn't set a proper table. She said this is what happens when someone has no breeding. Jennifer agreed. She said no wonder their mother was always so upset, calling me a disgrace to the family. I said nothing, just like I had for 43 years. After the memorial dinner, we sat down together. That's when Margaret brought up money. She said their mother had wanted the family property sorted out after she passed, and asked when that would happen. Daniel said he hadn't decided yet, that he wanted to think carefully, since it was their parents' inheritance. Jennifer jumped in. She said since he had the hospital and made so much money, he should give the property to them, saying he knew how hard things were for them. Margaret added that he should be the one to sacrifice, since the hospital was doing so well. Then she looked at me and said I was never really part of this family anyway, asking what right I had to care about family inheritance. At that moment, I set down my fork. 43 years. I had endured 43 years. The insults, the dismissals, the contempt. But that day, something inside me snapped. Daniel lost his temper first. He asked if, after 43 years, they were still going to act like this. Asking how they could say such things after everything I had done for this family. Margaret laughed mockingly. She asked what I had ever done, saying I just cooked for holidays and raised children, things any woman could do. Jennifer piled on. She said honestly, where would I be without their brother? That an orphan becoming a doctor's wife was already more luck than I deserved. And that I should be grateful. I stood up, and for the first time, I spoke back to my sisters-in-law. I told them that for 43 years, I had heard the same things over and over. Orphanage girl, no upbringing, no background. I said I had endured it all, right up until their mother's death. Margaret looked outraged. She asked if I was really talking back to them, asking who I thought I was. Who I am. I smiled. I said they had always bragged about being from an elite family. But I asked what those elite family daughters had actually done for 40 years. Looking down on others, talking behind people's backs. Was that all? The room fell silent. My sisters-in-law were speechless. They had never imagined I would push back. Daniel took my hand. He told me to calm down, and then he said it was time to stop hiding. Margaret looked confused. She asked what I was hiding, what he was talking about. Just then, the doorbell rang. 5. The truth revealed. I opened the door to find two people in formal suits. They introduced themselves as the CEO of Dawn Publishing and a producer from the National Broadcasting Network. They asked if this was the home of Mrs. Grace Kim, wife of hospital director Daniel Lee. My sisters-in-law came out to the living room, curious about what was happening. The publisher spoke. He said he was here regarding the 30th anniversary event for Wildflower, that since I had finally agreed to reveal my identity, he had come personally. The air in the room froze. Margaret's voice shook. She asked if he meant Wildflower, that famous author. The one who had sold 6 million copies. The producer smiled and confirmed it. He said that after 30 years of anonymity, I had finally agreed to reveal myself, and that readers across the country were waiting. Jennifer stared at me, stunned. She asked if I was really Wildflower, the famous essayist. I nodded. I told them I had been writing for 30 years. That every time I felt wronged, I picked up my pen. The publisher continued. He said my essay collection, Letters from an Orphan Girl, had been included in the National High School curriculum this year, and that my anonymous donations to orphanages over 30 years totaled $47 million. All of this would be announced at the event. My sisters-in-law turned pale. $47 million. Enough to buy multiple luxury homes. But I had donated every penny. To the orphanage where I grew up, and to other orphanages across the country. Margaret stumbled to the sofa. She asked in disbelief if all this time, I had been that famous author. I spoke calmly. I told them that while they were looking down on me, I was writing. I turned my sorrows into words. And those words touched people's hearts. The producer added that my story had already spread across the country. That despite the hardships I faced from my in-laws, I had kept writing, and had donated all my earnings. He said readers called me the nation's mother. I looked slowly at my sisters-in-law. I reminded them that for over 40 years, they had called me the orphanage girl. Someone with no background, no breeding. Margaret and Jennifer hung their heads. But I had built something with my own hands. They had boasted about their elite family background. But I had created something of my own through my own effort. I believed that was worth more than anything. Daniel squeezed my hand. He said it was okay to let the world know now. That I had more than earned it. I nodded. The secret I had kept for 30 years. It was finally time for the world to know. 6. When their world collapsed. 2 weeks later, devastating news broke. The hospital board had conducted an internal audit. At the nursing home run by Margaret's husband, serious fraud had been uncovered. Over 10 years, he had embezzled $12 million. He had stolen government subsidies and money meant for elderly patients. Margaret came to Daniel in tears. She asked how this could be happening, insisting her husband would never do such a thing. Daniel was firm. He said the evidence was clear, that 10 years of falsified records had been discovered, and that there was nothing he could do. Margaret begged. She said he was family, pleading with him to look the other way just this once. Daniel's face hardened. He asked if she knew whose money her husband had stolen. Money for dementia patients. Money from poor elderly people whose families couldn't afford anything else. He asked how he could possibly look away from that. To make matters worse, the investigation revealed that Jennifer's husband was also involved. He had been taking bribes in his medical equipment supply deals. Jennifer grabbed Daniel's legs. She begged him to save her husband, crying that he was the father of her children. Daniel told her that her husband had been supplying substandard equipment to the hospital for 5 years while pocketing the difference. He said there had been surgeries that nearly went wrong. Because of that equipment, her husband had gambled with patients' lives for profit. Daniel made the hard choice. He reported both men to the authorities and had them removed from their positions. He said he couldn't make exceptions for family, that he could never forgive people who stole from patients and endangered their lives for personal gain. The trials began. Both husbands received prison sentences. Margaret's husband got 5 years. Jennifer's husband got 3 years. Most of their assets were seized. The glamorous lives my sisters-in-law had built collapsed overnight. I watched it all unfold with complicated feelings. These were the people who had looked down on me for over 40 years. Who had despised me for being from an orphanage. Who had boasted about their elite backgrounds. Behind all their glamour, this ugliness had been hiding. And me? I had grown up in an orphanage. But I had never earned a single dishonest dollar. I had worked as a waitress while putting myself through night school. After marriage, I had earned money honestly through my writing. And I had given it all back to society. What does background matter? What matters is how you live your life. 7. The Wildflower blooms. In November 2024, a major bookstore hosted the 30th anniversary celebration for author Wildflower. For the first time in my life, I stood before my readers. Looking out at hundreds of people from the stage, my heart overflowed. The host introduced me. He said that for 30 years, I had touched millions of hearts while remaining anonymous, and that today, for the first time, I would reveal my face. Thunderous applause filled the room. I slowly raised the microphone. Hello, my name is Grace Kim. For 30 years, I have written under the name Wildflower. The audience fell silent. Everyone wanted to hear my story. I grew up in an orphanage. I never knew my parents' faces. I lived there until I was 18, then went out into the world alone. I worked at a restaurant while attending night school. I got married at 25. My husband's family was ashamed of my background. For over 40 years, I lived hearing them call me the orphanage girl. It was heartbreaking. So heartbreaking I had no one to confide in. So I started writing. I was 37. I poured my unspeakable sorrows into words. That was 30 years ago. Soft crying could be heard from the audience. Many people were wiping away tears. Today, I have prepared a final gift. I paused to catch my breath. I am combining 30 years of royalties with my personal savings to build the Wildflower Children's Home. This is my way of giving back to the orphanage that raised me. Cheers erupted from the audience. A standing ovation followed. I cried too, not from sorrow, but from gratitude. Then I noticed a stir at the back of the room. 2 women were standing there. Margaret and Jennifer. They looked haggard. Gone were their designer clothes. They wore simple, modest outfits. Slowly, they walked toward the stage. Then they knelt before me. Margaret sobbed as she spoke. She said she was sorry for 40 years of cruelty, that they had been less than human. That they had no right to call themselves from a good family. While treating me the way they did, she said she wanted to die from shame. Jennifer cried too. She said she never knew I was such an incredible person, that while they had been looking down on me, I had been living this remarkable life. She said they were pathetic. The audience fell silent. Everyone was watching. I slowly stepped down from the stage. I stood before my kneeling sisters-in-law. Please, stand up. They looked up at me. Sisters. It was the first time in 40 years I had called them that. I'm not forgiving you because you're worthy of forgiveness. When I was growing up in the orphanage, the nun who raised me always said that forgiveness isn't for the other person. It's for yourself. I'm tired of carrying 40 years of resentment. I want to let it go now. For you, and for myself. I took their hands and helped them to their feet. Then I embraced them. Applause erupted from the audience. Many were in tears. In that moment, I was truly free. I felt the weight I had carried in my heart for 40 years finally lift. To be recognized not for my background, but for how I had lived. That had been my lifelong wish. And today, that wish came true. Epilogue. The wildflower blooms on. 1 year later, in the autumn of 2025. In a small town, the Wildflower Children's Home opened its doors. We had torn down the old building and built something new, modest but warm. On opening day, I cut the ribbon with the children. Small hands held mine. The same small hands I had once had, 60 years ago. When I lived in a place just like this. My sisters-in-law were there too. Margaret was alone, her husband still in prison. Jennifer too. Their glamorous lives were gone. But their faces looked more at peace than before. Jennifer asked hesitantly if they could volunteer here. I told her of course, that I needed their help. After the ceremony, I walked alone through the orphanage garden. Wildflowers were blooming along the fence. Yellow dandelions, purple violets, white clover. Flowers that no one had planted. I spoke softly to myself. Yes, wildflowers bloom even when no one plants them. They grow even when no one tends to them. That's why I named myself Wildflower. Daniel came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my shoulders. He asked what I was doing. I told him I was looking at the flowers, asking if they weren't beautiful. He smiled and said I was more beautiful than any flower. I scolded him, asking what kind of thing that was to say. To a grandmother over 70. We laughed together, just like we had for over 40 years. That night, in my study, I wrote my final piece. Only in the autumn of my life did I truly understand. The greatest revenge is living well. The greatest victory is forgiveness. When others looked down on me, I walked my own path. When others despised me, I bloomed my own flower. A wildflower has no greenhouse. But a wildflower has the sky. The sky that belongs to no one and everyone. You who are reading this are also a wildflower. No matter what anyone says, you are beautiful enough. Bloom your own flower. That is the most beautiful revenge. I set down my pen. The moon hung outside my window. The same moon I used to see through the orphanage window 60 years ago. I closed my eyes. Thank you. For the days of sorrow, for the days of hardship, thank you for all of it. Because of all those days, I am who I am today.